Quick word of warning, this video has occasional swearing, so I would recommend proceeding at your own risk, and I would also caution against letting children watch this video. This time, we're on the Bernina line in TS Classic, more specifically a merged route available on Steam Workshop. For whatever reason, the route was sold in two separate sections, with the San Moritz to Poschiavo section coming in September 2018, followed by the Poschiavo to Tirano section in November 2019. For this run, I'll be driving the ABE 4/4 Mark III railcar with some passenger coaches in tow. Going into this, I wasn't sure if I would go all the way to San Moritz, but as it turns out, that's exactly what I ended up doing. Later in the video, I decided to run something from the Southern Pacific Railroad, specifically a different 4260. Followed by Norfolk Southern SD70 ACE number 1071 near the end. Speaking of the SP, I recommend watching Season 4 of the 3/4 show if you haven't seen it yet. Rest in peace, Joel. I have always been strongly against the use of AI in making YouTube videos, and now that goes for AI in general. Something that's been bothering me lately is the increased presence of Google's Gemini thingy. You can't really miss it anymore, as it can be found on YouTube as well as Google proper, as if anyone needed an AI tool to help with a Google Docs document or to summarize a given video for them. Although I suppose the latter case is kind of understandable these days, considering how short some people's attention spans can be. Although I'm not saying that the short attention span is a good thing. My reservations against the increased presence of this Gemini malarkey, and AI in general, come mainly from not wanting to be over-reliant on technology, or in this case, disturbing technology. At least I consider it to be disturbing. I dare say some people would disagree. That's alright. Your mileage may vary, but personally, I really don't like how the ruddy thing always pops up at the bottom of the screen when you go back to your Google Docs tab after looking at a different program on the computer. Yes, I know that I'm not under any obligation to use Gemini, or even Google Chrome for that matter, but that doesn't change how the program's increased presence gives one the impression that Google is trying to shove it in our faces as much as possible. Come to think of it, us lot on the internet have managed without AI for years. So why is it suddenly being shoved in our faces all the time? And yes, I am aware of the irony in complaining about Google's AI thing in a video on a platform owned by the aforementioned company. Even with that irony in mind, I would still highly recommend watching the video that Chris Eden Green made about the onslaught of all this AI bullshit. The video features contributions from other reasonably well-known railway YouTubers, including Jago Hazard and Terrier55 Stepney, as opposed to Terrier82 Box Hill. And now for the song discussion segment, which has effectively become a standard feature of my Random Thoughts videos. In this case, the song I will be discussing is Hair of the Dog from the Scottish band Nazareth. The name Nazareth rings a bell for reasons unrelated to music, and I'm not sure why the band chose it. In any case, I distinctly remember the first time I heard Hair of the Dog, although I'm not sure how I've still got this memory. In any case, it was back in 2022 when I was briefly in the town of Levin, near the bottom end of New Zealand's North Island. It wasn't until late July 2026 when I heard the song again, and I think I've taken a liking to it. I know that the opening lyric is actually Heartsbreaker Soul Shaker, but for some reason, I always hear it as Heartsbreaker Salt Shaker. The song is 4 minutes and 11 seconds long, and musically, it's notable for the grunty guitar riff that reappears on a frequent basis throughout 2/3 of the track. The instrumental break in the middle features an unusual machine known as a talk box, thus reminding me of Peter Frampton and the 14-minute-long live version of his song Do You Feel Like We Do. Another aspect of Hair of the Dog that intrigues me, aside from the narrator calling himself a son of a bitch in the chorus — I thought son of a bitch was meant to be an insult — is the fact that the title never actually appears in the lyrics. It's interesting how you get songs whose titles are mentioned multiple times throughout, such as Communique from Dire Straits. Others where the title is only mentioned once, case in point, Virginia Plain from Roxy Music. And other songs where the title is never mentioned at all, such as Vanishing Points from New Order. Incidentally, Vanishing Point is one of my favourite New Order songs. One thing that kind of bothers me about Nazareth's Hair of the Dog is the long/repetitive outro, although, to be fair, I understand why songs are often like this. They need something that'll make it memorable amongst the general audience, as it's easier to remember something the more often you hear it. In saying that, I think Hair of the Dog could have either had the fade out earlier than it actually did, or they could have gone back to that grunty guitar riff after 2 repeats of the chorus, and then faded out on the riff. I sometimes watch Family Guy these days, even if mainly because I remember seeing specific clips on YouTube many years ago, and I wanted to find out which episode they came from. Case in point, Peter's iconic dance to the Surfin' Bird song. If I had to pick a favourite character from the show, that would be a tie between Brian and Stewie, regardless of the confusing lack of explanation as to why Brian is sentient despite being a dog. Same sort of thing goes for Stewie, and how he has adult-level intelligence despite being an infant. Stewie's name throws me off a little bit because of the way it's pronounced. With my New Zealand accent, it doesn't feel right trying to pronounce Stewie, or Stewie, as I would want to say it, in the same way as how the Americans pronounce it. On the whole, and based on the episodes I've seen, which is nowhere near the whole show, mind, Family Guy can sometimes be decently funny, but some of the attempts at jokes and visual gags just have me wanting to say, in the words of the nostalgia critic, "That's not funny, you sick fuck." Meanwhile, there are some episodes that rely on beating unfunny stereotypes into the ground. Case in point, the season 16 episode HTT Pete. Another frustrating episode that comes to mind, albeit for different reasons, is the season 5 episode No Meals on Wheels. I can't think of a specific Family Guy episode that I'd recommend checking out, and I don't blame you if the show is not your cup of tea. I'm not sure if it's my cup of tea either. Might go back and watch The Simpsons again. Perhaps one of the most random things I've seen in semi-recent memory was this ute and a trailer in Waiouru, with both vehicles full of carrots, of all things, for some reason. Looking back at my shots of Shannon Railway Station from October 2022, and it really doesn't feel like it's been the better part of 4 years since that footage was taken. Similar sort of thing goes for how it doesn't feel like it's been a little over a year since I was last in Shannon, and saw DL 9325 passing by with DSG 3074 dead in tow, even though that was over a year ago. In the words of Mark Heiss Huber, time is fake. You know something I don't understand? When a tin of salmon actually says contains fish on the back of the label. Like, fucking course it's got fish in it. That would be like putting a sign that says contains uncomfortable seats on a Class 800. In other words, it's exactly what it says on the tin, quite literally. So what's the point in having the label say contains fish on the back? Another admittedly trivial thing that still bugs me somewhat is the use of British Railways Mark I coaches, not these exact ones though, in Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk film, or, as I want to call it, playing soldiers with Harry Styles, of all people. Anyway, I remember watching the film in a cinema when it was first released, or rather, soon after it was first released, and it didn't take long for me to notice that the coach's interior looked far too modern for a film that's supposed to be set in 1940. The Mark I coaches didn't exist until 1951. In addition, I distinctly remember that, in the film, the railway scenes are meant to take place near Woking, on the main line out of London Waterloo, and one of the characters even directly mentions Woking, but the railway scenes were actually shot on the Swanage Railway, a single-track branch line all the way down in Dorset, so quite a contrast from a busy 4-track main line out of a major London terminus. On the whole, and aside from the bizarre choice of coaching stock, not to mention trying to pass off Swanage as Woking, I remember Nolan's Dunkirk being a generally decent film, although the pacing could have been better in some places. In any case, I have no opinion on Christopher Nolan as a whole, and, partially based on warnings from videos made by Sidney Watson, I have no interest in watching Nolan's Odyssey, or any other modern-day Hollywood films, for that matter. I said in a previous video that I intended to go down south again in September, and that trip is still on the cards. Incidentally, it will be less than a week after the City Rail Link's opening, so that now makes 2 reasons why I won't be on the CRL for opening day. Even though I had thought that it could be good to be at the new stations on September 13, as there will likely be lots of other people, railfans or otherwise, taking photographs and footage. Therefore, less risk of being accosted by hostile station and security staff. Anyway, I was looking on the Mainlanders website and found that DC 4375 is running 2 trips, from Christchurch to Invercargill and back, in the middle of September, but I was initially very disheartened to see that neither trip lined up with when I had planned to be in Christchurch. So far, the one time I have been able to get any footage of DC 4375 in her restored condition was back in April 2026, but I couldn't stick around to film her departure from Addington Station because the DC was running late, as tends to be the case with a lot of mainline excursions in this country, and I needed to get out to the airport in time for the flight home. What made it worse was that the DC ended up going through the Whiteley Avenue crossing right as I was getting on the Yorbita bus, so you might be able to imagine the anger I felt from seeing the DC's departure, but not being able to film the fucking thing. Anyway, the good thing is that I have thought of a solution for the September trip, that being to change plans in order to allow time to see the Mainlander on the morning of Friday, September 18, but the priority on this trip will still be filming DX locomotives on the west coast while I still can. This is despite the possibility that, for all I know, there may not be any coal trains running while I'm over there. In which case, the only train I'll end up seeing would probably be the Transalpine, and maybe the X6 shunt to and from Hokitika as well. That was exactly the same scenario as what I was presented with in October 2024. On a completely unrelated note, although in keeping with the video's theme of random thoughts, there was a song from Ian Dury and the Blockheads that I recently discovered through unexpected means. The song in question is called I Want to Be Straight, and from what I gather, it's a bit of a satirical take on the idea of giving up drugs and booze in favour of a healthier and more conventional lifestyle. As for how I discovered the song in the first place, it was from seeing Tony Basil share on her Bookface page a link to the music video. Fancy that. The dancer, singer and choreographer of Mickey and Over My Head fame sharing something about a quirky British band from the early 80s. Small world. Anyway, I'm not as familiar with Ian Dury and the Blockheads as my dad is. Indeed, the first album he ever bought with his own money was one from Ian Dury. but on first impression, I reckon I Want to Be Straight is a decent song, and I particularly like how the band members all introduce themselves at the beginning of the song. On the topic of Ian Dury, I would recommend listening to Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick if you haven't heard of it before. I'm in a bit of a predicament at the moment, in the sense that there's something else that I wanted to bring up, even if only so I can get it off my chest, but at the same time, I don't want to go into much, if any, detail as I'm worried about unintentionally starting a flame war of sorts. Initially, I had thought of some people that I could potentially talk to for advice on how I should go about sorting out this predicament, but no DMs were sent because A, I'd have to go down to the South Island to find a DM, and B, those same people of whom I was thinking would probably just tell me to sort out the situation myself, so I was initially thinking that I had been caught between a rock and a hard place, in a manner of speaking. Speaking of speaking, I spoke to my dad about this situation, and he suggested that I do what will make me feel best in the long run. Dad is a wise man as far as I'm concerned, and it helps that his view on John Denver's music is similar to mine. I also know that I value my status as an independent reviewer, I want to maintain ties with good people, I know where I want my allegiance to lie, I don't like feeling under pressure, without referencing Queen and David Bowie, I know when something doesn't sit right with me, case in point, the unnecessary renaming of Britomart and Mount Eden railway stations, and I'm sick of being stressed all the time. Time to watch Citation Needed, specifically the original version from the technical difficulties, because I could do with a good laugh. I also went for my go-to pick-me-up song, that being the extended mix of Do You Wanna Dance by Tony Basil. I fucking love Do You Wanna Dance. And that was the end of my latest batch of random thoughts. I can safely say that this video went on longer than what I was initially thinking it would turn out to be. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm off to ponder and work out what I might say to my favourite non-railway YouTubers if, by some miracle, I ever get to meet any of them. If you've stuck around to the end of the video, you win a chain of motels run by some plates that scam their customers. It's the Con Dish Inns.